I got a really good comment on one of my videos recently. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. It read, Rome 1. Kill the general to rout the army. Troy. Kill the army to rout the general. It's absolutely true. It's what I'd done for basically every single Troy battle I had uploaded until that point, and I realised it instantly when I read that comment. It's simply what's effective. The nature of the game determines that to be effective. And it reveals something absurd about the way these games all work now. The hero unit is the only real threat on the battlefield. It was bad in Three Kingdoms, where I could win the battle at Changban with borderline zero losses when I played in romance mode. It's even worse now in Troy, where heroes dictate the entire battle, with the gameplay often starting and ending with them, and the actual units you bring are only supports for the gameplay that orients around them. Using the word support just there reminds me of something. I took 4.5 years out from Total War, starting in late 2014, mostly due to Rome 2's release and its implications on the trajectory for the franchise. I can honestly say I didn't launch a single Total War title during that whole time. I was done. I arrived back in mid-2019 with Three Kingdoms, which was getting some high praise. I've had a PC gaming tactics and strategy itch my entire life, and the motivation to return to something I'd had an affinity for since childhood pulled me back in. The first game I ever played on anything was Red Alert 1 in 1997 as a 5-year-old, and eventually I moved on to the Shogun 1, which I first played as a demo from the May 2000 issue of PC Gamer. I knew about Total War before its first title launched. I was there from the start, and so was something else. Single entity units. Some of you will already know this, but Shogun 1 had a unit called Kensai. It's not even a unit, it's one man. He's one man. And as Shogun 2 put it 11 years later, when man and sword become one, mastery is meaningless. The sword wields the man, making him unbeatable, a living legend. Kensai means sword saint, and just like the more literally named katana hero of Shogun 2, the Kensai is supreme on the field. If arquebus don't take him down before he makes it to the enemy line, there's now a ticking clock where their men become the seconds. They all do their duty, one after another, to engage and fall to his unmatched dueling ability. Nobody on the field can match his skill. It's only a question of depletion, either of inferior opponents to cut down, or his own stamina to sustain the dance. The strength to continue to lift his sword to parry has its limits, because he's only a man. He's a man just like all the other men on the field. He's just better than they are. He takes his first fight, and he wins. He moves on to the next, and the next, and the next. He continues to gamble, and his skill carries him through. He takes his ground and adopts his best stance and does what he's trained for all his life. He does what he's expected to do. He does it over and over again, flipping the coin, and always getting to live for another 5 seconds to go again. But this time, he's depleted, and he falls to a man that was merely lucky enough to be so far back in the order. The Kensai dies, not because he was outmatched, but because he could only kill 200 men. Killing 200 men is all that any man can do. This time, he dies. Although the single entity has been a part of Total War since its inception, it clearly didn't exist then as it does now. Now you have Lu Bu, you have Achilles, you have those guys from Warhammer. I never had any problem with the idea when I returned to Total War last year. I never really thought about it much because it had never been a bad thing before. You can probably tell I once thought it was just another one of those cool things about Shogun. The possible appeal of single entity units is really clear like that. Their simple animation and weird movement didn't detract from it. It conveyed exactly what it was supposed to, and just like all of those games back then, the imagination of the child could take it and run with it. Games from around 2000 left enough to the imagination for the player to fill in the gaps. These guys and their place in the game were a small but satisfactory part of that. You had Total War, a game that finally came along and elevated real-time tactics forever, and it even had the individual single men of classic RTS, only they now were even more special than in any Command & Conquer game. There was the epic grand scale of units with hundreds of men, and then there was the contrast offered by one supreme warrior, the Sword Saint. So why is it that I think single entity units like these are a problem for Total War now? When I returned to Total War last year, it was of course to play Three Kingdoms. I wasn't sure if I'd ever play a Total War again, but here I was. I wasn't sure what to pick, records or romance, so I went for romance. I wanted to see the intended game experience of Total War fast forwarded nearly 5 years into the future and played to the max. I was ready to step into the time machine. Just like old times, here's hoping. Legendary difficulty romance Sao Sao. I booted it up and god damn, it was too easy. Easy in a way it never had been before. I was playing on Legendary and it didn't take long before I was spamming cavalry. Loads of cavalry, with heroes screening them, and that was all I needed to do. Here's footage of one of my first battles from that first campaign. I didn't even render it properly. I just quickly optimised an early battle where I immediately go north to Liu Dai and attack his army of 4,000. Garrison and standing army both, as it's caught in the open. A perfect early challenge. This is my first Total War gameplay in nearly 5 years. This is the worst I'll ever be at Total War without necking shots. The rustiest I've ever been, and I'm embarrassing the AI with the simple tactic of kiting their army apart so I can isolate their ranged units. I'm engaging their helpless ranged units with my single entity heroes until they rout and leave the protection of the rest of the army, and then passing them over to my melee cavalry, waiting like vultures to mop them up efficiently. Rinse and repeat. I'm also taking opportunistic charges with my melee cavalry on the side of what my heroes are doing. I'm dismantling an entire stack of 4,000 while outnumbered 3-1, and I'm doing it all on the back of the mobility of my single entities and the inability of the enemy to retaliate effectively. They're not even using their bows. So why are single entities such a problem here, and not with Shogun 1, which had already done what very superficially would appear to be the exact same thing 20 years ago? For Shogun 1, it wasn't essential to the gameplay, it wasn't an important part of the game, it was up to the player how much of it they wanted. It was just a recruited unit like any other. It only appeared in the late game, and if the player wanted to experience more of it, they recruited more Kensai, and that was that. You'd come up against them sometimes on the other side, and every time they would be very ominous, and you would have to just accept that hundreds of your men deserve to die to his expertise.
敵の大将の首を取りました。敵の軍勢は指揮官を失いました。
Or a shuriken catches him between the eyes, and that's the end of that. He's just a man, after all, and all men are mortal. Achilles of Troy and Lu Bu of Romance Mode 3 Kingdoms aren't just men, though. They have health bars, and you can see them all the time while playing. In Troy and Warhammer and Three Kingdoms Romance mode, every leader has a health bar. The Kensai didn't have a health bar. He was just a man with a sword. It only took one lucky stroke and he was felled. One stray bullet. And that's what your general was in every Total War game for a long time. A man. Even Rome 2 had this right. The order of battle was always the same, and it was good for the gameplay. Your general is on a horse. He's behind the rest of your army. He's not to be committed to the fight in any way that truly risks him. He's there as a last resort hammer to the last anvil you're likely to still be able to form upon the enemy. Even Shingen of Shogun 2, with his localised fear effect and superior fire cavalry at his side and ready to bail him out of trouble, is not to be thrown into the thick of the fighting unless absolutely necessary. That would feel wrong. It cheapens them, and it flattens the hierarchy that makes these games so impactful. People complain about unit diversity in Shogun 2, but where did the chain of command go in all these other games? Why would you put the most important asset of your campaign, your faction leader, on the front line with the grunts? You fully expose the high value target to the fancies of the enemy. You make it that easy for them. Earlier games would rub it in your face that what you were doing was foolish.
Our general is in grave danger, my lord!
That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. As soon as Shingen goes near them, the entire army just breaks. What happened to using strength to conceal weakness? Your faction leader is not a Kensai. He leads, he directs. That's the in-game embodiment of you down there. The original Rome had a really cool idea. It also made it into Medieval 2, after which it was suddenly dropped. It was a general camera, and it meant that you had to play every battle in the campaign from over your general's shoulder. If you wanted to effectively manage your army from that perspective, you'd probably be perched on a hill with a clear view of the field, away from the heat of battle. That is what a general does. This shows that Rome Total War had an excellent attitude towards the role of the general. It had such a good attitude that it tried to make the most of it and build on it and dig deeper into it. This is majestic, just like the Kensai of Shogun 1 was majestic, inspiring and appropriate. It summons up everything you ever read and imagined in history books. Perfect resonation. The frontline Kensai from Shogun 1 of 2000, the calm and commanding Shingen from Shogun 2 of 2011, the hot-blooded Achilles from Troy of 2020. Which of these is the odd one out? And I really mean odd one out. Totally, functionally, entirely different from both of the others. Which one? I'll give you a second to think about it. It's Achilles, and it's because he's got a health bar, which is an absolutely massive deal. What's ironic about the health bar is that it makes him invincible in a way that Shingen, leading his entire faction, and the Kensai leading the charge with his unparalleled melee ability, lack entirely. What's also ironic about this invincibility Achilles has is that it's shared by every single other hero in the game. Achilles is no more immortal than anyone else. They're all invincible. They all have health bars that mean they can run through the enemy ranks for minutes or hours at a time. Assuming you keep them out of the uncommon situation where they're stuck in a static fight and get poked by spears until their health bar very slowly depletes, there's no way in Troy to effectively deplete a hero's health bar. There's no real force that can be efficiently brought to bear upon them. Most of the time, they can run around with complete impunity. Archers and slingers don't even try. What this means is that every single hero unit in Troy, of which the legendary Achilles is functionally just yet another clone of, has an immense capacity for engagement and disengagement. There's a very low cost to the action of engaging an enemy unit with a hero in Troy. It's even more forgiving than in Three Kingdoms, where Lu Bu and characters like him could potentially score 1,000 kills in a battle from area of effect abilities they have before finally going down. Achilles in Troy is way more powerful than Lu Bu. Achilles in Troy is way more powerful than the Kensai. And it's because he can repeatedly manipulate the enemy into taking bad action and taking bad fights. Remember my video about why Total War's last success was 8 years ago, and how I said I might follow up with a video about heroes? Well, here's the described follow-up, and I'm going to borrow a line from its predecessor now. Imagine Troy from 2004, but Brad Pitt is just running around, drawing enemy troops into bad engagements. That's the biggest problem I've got with heroes as they currently exist. It was bad in Three Kingdoms, it's apparently bad in Warhammer, it's extremely bad in Troy. I fought Achilles' first battle in Troy, and took 4 losses to wipe out the entire enemy army. Half of my army didn't even need to fight. With perfect micromanagement, which I could have achieved if I kept doing it, I could have won Achilles' opening battle with 0 casualties. If anyone wants examples of how Total War is going towards being dumbed down, here you go. If anyone is going to look at this and tell me that Total War is not dumbed down, you are full of shit. A Kensai can only kill 200 men before he falls. That's along the line of what any unit in any Total War game can pull off. That's just a unit taking out another unit, or a unit taking out a couple of other units. I glorified it at the start of the video because it is actually quite glorious. It's a romantic depiction of unparalleled skill on the battlefield occurring in front of your eyes when you're 8 years old. It's the ultimate weeb wet dream, and on its own merits, it's cool as fuck, but it's just one unit being extremely tediously slowly taken out by another one. That's the tactical summation of what actually happens when a Kensai is deployed. And it's not functionally very different from having one full unit of 120 Yari Samurai stand in his stead and do it more conventionally and do it with less style. In Troy, Achilles can wipe out entire armies with no risk to himself by simply pulling them into bad engagements one by one. Any hero can do it. The AI in Total War doesn't know how to rationally navigate being trolled to death piece by piece by an invincible man with a massive health bar who they can't realise doesn't actually constitute a threat to them. Not only are heroes usually pretty harmless compared to regular full-size units, but there's usually absolutely nothing on the battlefield that will take less than 5 minutes to kill a hero. When you think about it like that, and actually accept that fact, it really cheapens it all. There's no real threat to the heroes, who are supposed to be your prize asset and in need of protection. Imagine a game of chess where the king can never be mated, or where the queen can never be taken. There's really no way for you to fuck up the fight. The stakes are very low. There are no critical mistakes, and there's nothing you really should be trying to avoid, or trying to do. In Shogun 1, the Kensai can fall very quickly if he gets completely surrounded by multiple units that are charging downhill into him. If the raw tactical situation is against him, he's in trouble. On top of that, it only takes one bullet and he's gone. All his dueling ability doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he was about to win 100 katana duels in a row, he dies to the stray bullet all the same. Shingen will die in an instant if a unit of matchlocks gets a clear volley on his bodyguard, which he's leading from the front. Him and his entire bodyguard will die in seconds to a unit of Yari Ashigaru, the weakest unit in the game, if he charges straight into it. If he dismounts and climbs the walls of a fort to try to capture it, the unit of retainers that can be found inside every fort will devastate his bodyguard, and possibly one of them will best him the moment the melee begins. It can easily happen. That's why Shingen doesn't lead the charge. The units under his command do. His fear aura, if fully utilised, supports the Rout at the thickest part of the fighting, where his best units are. His rally, used at the most crucial moment, strengthens the resolve of the weakest link in the valiant last-ditch defence. His bodyguard finally crashes into the blob during the last gasp desperate attempt to eke out the impossibly close but crucial victory. That's how the general makes the difference in a Total War game, meaningfully. There's really nothing like this combat decisiveness for Troy. The heroes are single entities that lack the ability to properly engage and take out enemy units in the way that a whole bodyguard can. It's an improvement on Three Kingdoms, where some of the romance mode characters could area of effect bomb entire blobs into dust. It's better than that of 3K romance, but it's worse than possessing an actual bodyguard that can be committed to battle as a last resort, like any other cavalry unit, but without being expected to. He's there as a disciplined reserve. Remember the giant bodyguards that accompany your faction leader in Rome Total War, and increased in size as his prestige grew, and who you'd always be reluctant to commit unless absolutely necessary, for fear that he lose all of his very few hit points in some really unlucky, organic moment in the melee? Unless you do the rally exploit. Me too. You could use him like Alexander, and have him take his chances and give him close shaves, but every time you did that, you knew you were playing Russian roulette. It lended it way more meaning and weight and significance. You were actually taking a risk. Knowing your general could have died if he got really unlucky, and that you were always at least partially responsible if it happened, made it mean something when he triumphed and survived, and the game even rewarded you with an extra hit point when he emerges victorious with a flesh wound. 1 hit point. In Troy, every time a hero is close to losing his Iliadic duel, he runs off the battlefield like Paris tried to do in the movie, and it's frustrating to attempt to catch him to make sure the fucker goes down. It's actually really annoying in general in Troy, trying to catch routing or shattered units. The heroes in Troy are not decisive in combat with regular units, and they're not decisive against each other. It really only gives you a few options, and they're both introduced by Warhammer, and they're both terrible. The first one is to just be there as a wizard, spamming magical abilities that are really divorced from the gameplay and the aesthetic and the era, and that pull you out of the military simulator feeling that Total War became known for and should not have given up on. I've never had the feeling of a general being a leader of men from doing any of this stuff in Troy or Romance Mode Three Kingdoms. I much preferred using Sao Sao as a regular cavalry unit in Three Kingdoms Records mode over the brief period I played Romance and was spamming abilities with buttons to tweak fights. So that's the first option. Have your general pretend to be a wizard, or to serve as an annoying troll that just pretends to be willing to fight the enemy, always running away at the last second, taunting weaker enemy units into compromising situations. In other words, doing exactly what I did in my first Total War gameplay in 5 years, and also doing what I did in my 4 losses video. I don't think any of these are good for gameplay. You're either indulging in timing abilities and their cooldowns during normal play, having your traditional tactical Total War play be interrupted, or you're just exploiting unsatisfactory AI in ways that give you opportunities for ridiculous advantages and complete isolation, Advantages so bad that you can basically delete units for free if you're ruthless and patient enough. This is not possible with Kensai, whose only real use was to plausibly support other units in their engagements, or to tie up enemy units while the rest of the army did the work, hoping the Kensai's skill and stamina reserves will keep him alive long enough for the victory earned by the rest of the army to eventually relieve him and allow him to catch his breath and live another day. Kensai from Shogun 1 shows single entities are not themselves a problem. In that game, they're just another unit. They're almost identical to the Katana Hero of Shogun 2. Both of those are a combat unit being used regularly. Their different properties give them interesting tactical options, and are arguably a boon to the gameplay in addition to an implementation of a cool idea. A Kensai could dodge entire volleys of arrows and close the distance while taking no damage, for example. It somehow didn't feel cheap. I think it helped a lot to know that he actually is risking his life. You're not just sitting there zigzagging mindlessly while a retarded AI burns all its ammo. You're running the gauntlet, and the enemy is making a calculated and rational decision to try to take you down. You don't have to suspend disbelief. There is actual tension. It's a real situation. Likewise, if he's pinning the enemy and taking all the risk while your flanking cavalry get ready to crash in and win the fight, it felt like his skill was earning a clean victory. It was tense, and it was rewarding as a result. Once again, the tension is important. This is just an aside, but I have a hypothesis that I'd like to see confirmed if true. First of all, it's guaranteed that the Katana Hero in Shogun 2 started out as a one-man unit early in development, as a single entity. It would have been the modern equivalent of Shogun 1's supreme melee combatant. It's obvious they would have started out wanting to do it again. It might have even been a big reason for them to revisit the period, to have hero units once again. Imagine a single man katana hero taking on an entire unit of katana samurai. There's really no more stirring a scenario in a total war based around Sengoku Jidai. A full unit of 160 katana samurai, each proficient with the sword from a lifetime of use, and all preparing to duel the sole katana hero holding a bridge, who far surpasses each and every one of them. They must have tried it and decided their animations weren't good enough. They don't seem very confident in their matched animation system, considering they removed it from later games. They must have decided it didn't look good enough when you zoomed in to watch, something everyone would have been doing constantly. Maybe the engine made it look glitchy and weird to have 160 men slamming into one guy. Either that, or they noticed how long it takes for one man to duel and defeat entire units, and decided it was way too slow for the otherwise fast-paced and decisive combat of Shogun 2. It could be a bit of both. Maybe they just finally realised it unbalances the unit scale. Either way, it seems pretty certain that they decided single entity units just didn't work for Shogun 2, which is remarkable. It would be interesting to know why they decided against it. The idea of single entities in Total War is as old as Total War itself. It shipped with it. Its first ever implementation was benign, and then it disappeared for a long time. It was dropped on purpose. It's a decision that was made. For Shogun 2, a decision was made during development to just not have the single entity units of its predecessor in an era of matched combat. Why? I think I know why. Because the AI couldn't rationally navigate it, and every implementation of it they tried completely broke the game and removed all meaningful challenge. That is my hypothesis. And now it's in every single game. starting with Warhammer. Three Kingdoms wasn't even going to provide the option to play without single entity heroes, and they added in another mode at the last minute. That's what Records mode is. The Records mode that I quickly switched to in order to have a bearable experience with some semblance of classic Total War. Now, with Troy, you've got a historical game where there's no way to turn it off. It's locked in, just like when the campaign difficulty is set to legendary and the battle difficulty greys out. You've not got any choice. Troy is a historical game with single entity units and no way to turn it off, and that's a first. And there aren't just lone heroes like Achilles and Hector, there are also mythical creatures like Minotaurs and Cyclops. They all have the same thing in common: massive health bars that there exists no way to effectively deplete, and special abilities that you have to babysit and micromanage during combat. When arguably your attention should be going to tactically decisive actions with real units, using them in conjunction to control the battlefield legitimately. The tight, decisive manoeuvring of Shogun 2 is gone, and this is what we have instead. Heroes with an effectively endless pool of hit points and units under them that usually can just run away forever if they're threatened, and an AI with no idea how to rationally navigate the very simple situations that emerge from these elements. Single entity units have now become one of the things that are anchoring Total War in a place that stops it from ever again depicting what made it great in the first place. Large-scale battles with masses of rank and file soldiers fighting in huge units. Can you imagine a single entity Caesar commanding his legions from horseback and crashing into Gauls, killing 5 men at a time, and casting Testudo on his legionnaires to protect them from Vercingetorix's hail of slingshot from the heavens? Can you imagine them both standing depleting each other's health bars in the melee, taking forever to do it? Caesar eventually giving up and running away, leaving his army to carry on the fight with none of his magic spells. Think about how far this is from the Kensai and Shogun 1, furiously shredding entire hordes of men, able to go down himself at any moment. I don't know about you, but one of those is a spectacle in a way that the other just isn't. One of those will always fall flat. There's another guy on YouTube that does Total War videos, like me, and while I've always had a very narrow focus on the gameplay of conveying the mechanics and real-time tactics of these unique fights, he's always tried to convey the scale and scope of battle, the spectacle and the aesthetics of war that Total War uniquely shows. He's the biggest person on YouTube that does Total War, so on that basis alone, he captures the appeal of something like Total War better than anyone else. He's got it down, and he's not very happy with how things are going either. And just like me, he's able to clearly articulate his reasons for it. His name's Pixelated Apollo, and he uploaded a passionate video a few months ago that was really on the mark, where he explains a lot of his problems with the series, and there was a part that stuck with me. I'll play it.
We want realism. We want a general that is human, not Superman. And so they had to add that records mode, which still, with records mode, it's still, you got a super powerful, superhuman soldier general that is hard to kill. So Three Kingdoms, again, adopted a lot of the Warhammer mechanics in terms of arcadiness, and the siege battles were super dumbed down. Like, the reason I love Total War is seeing the life of a soldier. You know, and when Three Kingdoms came out, it was all about the heroes. It was about the generals, the famous heroes, and the soldiers. Initially, the unit cards were just like a soldier in the shadow. Like, you couldn't even see their face. And that just takes away that immersion of like, oh, this farmer's picking up a weapon to fight for his country, you know? That's why I love that Life of a Soldier series, because you get to see a lowly soldier, a private or whatever, that is not super wealthy. He's not super powerful, but he is the reason why the nation wins the war is because of these lowly soldiers that pick up arms for their country, and seeing them fight in battles and hoping they survive, and he just dodged an arrow, or he dodged a blow, it's really cool to see that. And I feel like they're stepping away from that. It's all about heroes now. I don't care about the heroes. I learn about the heroes. Napoleon, Wellington, Hannibal, Caesar. We know the heroes. We know them. We understand their story. What you don't get in the history books is the common man. You get to see the common soldier fight, and it kind of puts a face. That's what was so cool for me with Total War, is that it put a face to those who died, who have no name. The no name fallen soldiers, the lost soldiers that we'll never hear about, we'll never know, but it puts a face to them, and it makes it that much more real.
So there's two very different people that have always been fans of Total War for different reasons. Arguably the two biggest reasons, and we both have problems and are clearly articulating them. A person that's very deep into the actual tactics and combat effectiveness, and a person that's interested in the scope and scale of battle, the exact same scope and scale that drew me to Total War in the first place, and we both are unhappy about the direction Total War's going. So what's left? What's the appeal and merit that still remains? What's there? What is left? Is this the same franchise anymore? If it is, what is left? What remains of it, then? Someone out there tell me, because I don't know. I have a Patreon page for if you like the videos enough to want to support their production. Special thanks to Matteo Olivetti, Nerdington, the Rody451, Halcyon, William Balangari, and Robert Sparks.